is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 508. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. And joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, fresh off of a walk with the dog, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, welcome back. What's going on, buddy?
Not a whole lot. I don't know, getting excited for a month where I'm actually traveling quite a bit. But
where are you going? What are you doing?
Well, we're doing coverage next week of the MPL. So in about a week, I'm heading down to LA. Mm-hmm. And then the weekend after that, I'm heading back to Oakland to visit family. And then the weekend after that, I'm going to TwitchCon. So I don't actually normally travel that much anymore, but yeah, here we are.
All right. Yeah, I've got the opposite. The only thing I have is the MPL next week, and then I'm kind of home for a while. I'm going to enjoy that. So you enjoy your time on the road. I'll enjoy my time here. In the meantime, listeners, you get to enjoy a show this week. This one is going to be a Cube refresher. We're kind of in the last stretch before we start gearing things up. We're going to be doing the M20 and Modern Horizons sunset shows next week. I don't know if we're going to combine them or split them or what we're going to do, but that's coming up next week. And of course, we'll be looking forward to Throne of Eldraine as we work our way closer to the new set. But now we figured, look, this is the time when cubes start to really pop up in people's minds because, M20's been out for a while. Don't have anything new in the immediate sense. So sometimes when you get a little bit to that point of a format, it can be awesome to bust out the cube. And we're going to be talking about cubes today. First things first, this show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. And I encourage you to check out their buy list. And I'll put a link in the show notes for this, but this is where you can sell your cards back to CFB. And boy, I'll tell you, if you want to trade them in, you get 30% store credit bonus. So that's a big deal, right? I mean, if you're trading them in for store credit, you're going to get plus 30% on whatever the buy price is for the cards that you're selling. If you've got some random old cards sitting around, I'll tell you, there's some old ones there that you might not even be aware are worth stuff now. Like I just went to the page right now and asceticism's on there. And, it's like a rare from Scars of Mirrodin from a while back, and it wasn't even that good. They'll give you $8 for it in cash or $10.40 in store credit as of the time of this recording when I was reading. I mean, you can get $10.40 for this card that you're not going to be playing in your really any deck unless you're jamming a bunch of Commander or whatever. So you might have more than you think sitting in that old binder of yours, and you can turn them into boxes or singles or whatever it is that you want over at channelfireball.com. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources. All the information's there. Check it out. And we thank everybody who supports us there. Let's do a crack-a-pack here. Luis, this comes from Sherika, whom I met at GP Vegas, I believe. And let's see what we've got here. First card out is Inspired Charge. Are you inspired enough to pick Inspired Charge at this point? You're not, are you?
It's not a very powerful cube. I would I would not take Inspired Charge now.
Yeah. Octoprophet.
Not a big fan of that one either. It's a playable card, but it's not one I'm super in love with.
Yeah, same. This one's better at 4. It's Lavakin Brawler.
I do like Lavakin Brawler. This is the front runner right now, though. I am not as high on picking red cards. They're fine, but it's not exactly where I want to be.
Yeah. Moreland Inquisitor, 1 and a white, 2/2. You can give really first strike.
Don't like white cards. I would not first pick Moreland Inquisitor.
Definitely. Gift of Paradise. There's a little mana fixer.
Yeah, I think I'm
not as good as the Brawler.
No, I'm on Brawler over that, I think.
Yeah, same thing with Sanitarium, Skeleton, Centaur Courser, not so much over the Brawler. Sorcerer of the Fang. Have you ever actually lost to this card? The 1/3 for 1 and a black with 6 mana tap.
I've had it be annoying, but I have not lost to it directly.
Yeah, same. What about Boneclad Necromancer?
I like Boneclad Necromancer. I think I might take that over everything else right now.
Yeah, over the Brawler? What? Really?
Yeah, well, it depends. Am I drafting on Arena? Because
sure, you are.
If I'm drafting on Arena, I'm way more likely to be blue-black than I am basically anything else.
Oh, interesting. So your preferences have become solidified. I know that you were playing a heck of a lot of ranked draft on Arena.
Yeah, I ranked up to Mythic last month, and on the back of basically drafting blue-black something like the last 7 or 8 times I drafted, plus like a lot coming up to that point. But I just hit a streak where all I was drafting was blue-black because it was just it always felt like it was the place to be.
What percentage of that would you say is maybe you found a gap in the bots versus versus personal preference? That's
basically the whole thing. It's that basically the bots did not value a lot of the like kind of mid to low tier, or cards they consider mid to low tier. I think were better than that, especially among the black commons in particular. So what would end up happening is you could always get Sanitarium Skeleton, Bone Splinters, Soul Salvage, Fathom Fleet, Cutthroat, and even some Audacious Thieves in good proportions. And then that plus the fact that Renowned Weaponsmith was a card the bots never took, so you got one. An average of pretty close to 1 per draft. 24 packs open, they would never take it. They would never take Bows or Vials of Dragonfire, and you just ended up with this good blue-black value deck that was, it did its thing very reliably, and until they change the bots, I think that's the deck you should largely try to be.
Okay. Next is Maniacal Rage. That's not really a thing. What about Captivating Gyre, the 4 blue sorcery, return up to 3
I don't like that card
creatures.
Very much. M20 is just not fast enough to really take advantage of it.
Right, and you don't want it in your control deck anyway. Season of Growth. We talked about this one before. It's the 1 and a green enchantment. Whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control, you scry 1, and whenever you target a creature with one of your spells, you get to draw a card.
I'm not a huge fan of Season of Growth. I know that some people have started to like it more. I haven't been super impressed with it. I think it's probably better than Boneclad Necromancer, even with my predilections. But it's the kind of card I do like getting earlier in the draft rather than later. Yeah,
I would take. I think it's just bad. Every time somebody plays it, I think, there's maybe some way this can go wrong, but it usually doesn't. Apostle of Purifying Light is our last uncommon. It's the 1 and a white 2/1 protection from black, and you can pay 2 mana to exile a card from a graveyard.
Not super on this one either. I guess I'm on probably I think any of Boneclad Necromancer, Season of Growth, or Lavakin Brawler are all reasonable.
You're putting Season of Growth in that same. How is it even close? I didn't even think it was remotely.
I think if you start with it, you can do something with it. These other cards also suck. So far, we don't have a single card I'm happy first picking.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to improve on that. Our rare is Bishop of Wings, white for a 1/4. Whenever an angel enters a battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life, and when one of them dies, you get a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying.
Yeah, okay, I'm not in for that. So
yikes! I would take Lavakin Brawler. What do you actually pick here? You said you had the Brawler of the Season and the Boneclad Necromancer.
I would probably
kind
take
of on your
Boneclad,
radar.
then Brawler, then reluctantly Season, I suppose.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not thrilled about any of it.
Dude, that was a bad pack.
That was actually one of the worst packs I've ever seen. I would have taken probably taken a Bone Splinters over any of those cards.
Yeah. Oh my goodness sakes. All right. So that was bad. But that's okay because we have other formats to keep us entertained, namely Cube. And we love to talk about Cube on the show because it's one of our favorite ways. In fact, it just is our favorite way, right? It's my favorite format. If I could only choose one, it would be Cube.
I overall prefer to play Cube than any other format. The only thing, as I've said this before, is that challenges it is doing a draft on literally the Pro Tour. But that's a very narrow place to be. So.
Yeah, right. That's just something that you only get to do a few times a year, at the most. So, yeah. But in the meantime, Cube is really the pinnacle, right? I remember when. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's worth talking about Cube now because there's a lot of cubing going on, kind of like you mentioned earlier. We're seeing tons of different cubes on Magic Online. Also, live cubing is something people have always done, and it's at a point where I think people are enjoying Cube, and for those who haven't played Cube, this is maybe a reason to go out and play it. And for those who have, this is a way to get a little better at it because after, basically when I watch people play Cube, I realize a lot of people fall into kind of the same traps and maybe don't prioritize things quite the same way. And I think that we can help with that.
Yeah. So let's give a quick overview for any of our newer listeners who maybe have heard about people cubing or seen it going on, but not really understood what it was. What is a cube? I mean,
at a base level, a cube is just a curated collection of cards that you draft out of. There's no requirements as to what those are. Most cubes are singleton, but I've played cubes that aren't. I've played cubes like I played their, Jamie Park and those guys, the like old school players. They have
You mean the greedy New York bankers?
Yes, exactly. They have a like mega powerful cube that has multiple sets of power in it.
Okay, see, they're just backing up my premise.
The greedy New York bankers of cubing.
Man, that is insane.
Yeah, but for the most part, cubes are singleton, and it's just like a large box of cards, and you make packs out of it, and you draft it as if you were, drafting any set, right? You can do 3 packs of 15. Sometimes we do different packs or whatever, but let's say just in general 3 packs of 15, and they generally have a theme. The way you describe them. Mm-hmm. The most common cube is probably like Legacy Cube, I think is the most commonly found cube.
Yeah.
Which is
I would say
basically a collection of Magic's greatest hits, but no cards like Black Lotus or Soul Ring. Nothing that would be not legal in Legacy. There's also the Vintage Cube, which has those cards. There's like the Modern Cube, which is currently on Magic Online, actually, which is all cards legal in Modern. But there's also like Pauper Cube, which is all commons. I actually have drafted a mono green cube once. It was actually pretty fun. So it's just all green cards. You can do Khans Cube or Innistrad Cube, which is basically just like drafting Khans or Innistrad. But in a way that you can keep doing it. I mean, one of the advantages of Cube is once you get a cube together, it's free to draft.
That's the huge. I mean, you're getting the experience that we want anyway, and it's just repeatable. Yeah. As long as you want to keep doing it.
I'm not going to go out and tell you it's cheap to put together a Modern Legacy or Vintage Cube, but if you wanted to put together a Khans or Innistrad Cube, it would not cost you that much, and then you'd be able to draft those sets over and over.
Yeah, one of the cool things, too, is that even if you are going to take on a fairly big undertaking like a Vintage or Legacy Cube, you can build it up, right? It doesn't. You don't have to have every card present on day one. You can say, well, I don't have this dual land yet, but when I get one, it'll come in.
You'll live, And I think that you can also build a cube to whatever specifications you want. We've seen tons of different kinds of them. So basically, cube is a way to make a format that you draft. Most cubes are modern or Legacy or Vintage are like the most common cubes, and Legacy, I think, is the most common of all of those, where it's basically just Magic's greatest hits. You get to draft all these really cool cards, and you get to keep doing it.
Yeah. And I think you're right, by the way, because I think that the original cubes didn't have such a restriction. It was just cube was the format. So they weren't really thinking in terms of like, well, it has to all be from Legacy. But the truth is that most people don't have Power 9 cards to just throw in a cube, right? So what that meant was you wouldn't want to have one Mox, right? It was either all of them or none of them. So people just said, well, I'm just not going to put those cards in, just by necessity.
So, once you have this cube, and a really easy way to draft it if you are a listener who does not have access to one in paper, right? Like you don't know a friend who has it or what have you, is on Magic Online. It's actually one of the best arguments for Magic Online at this point. I can't wait till Arena gets cube, which I firmly believe it will eventually. It just needs more sets. But we're going to see a historic cube at some point here. I'm convinced. But
no, you're right. That if they keep backfilling with these older cards, then at some point you hit critical mass, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So, besides Magic Online, if you or your friends have a cube, or if this inspires you to build a cube, I'll be so happy. Like even if it's just building like a Pauper cube or a Peasant cube, I guess there's some common plus uncommon cubes. If you go to something like CubeTutor.com, you can look at other people's cubes. Actually, the Vintage Cube list that I've helped build is up there too. But you can find other lists too and get inspiration from those. So, what are you doing when you sit down to draft cube? I think at a baseline, one of the things people need to realize is you are more trying to construct a constructed deck during the draft than draft a deck. It's not. I mean, you still have to figure out what's open, but don't think it as much in terms of which colors are open as much as which decks are open.
Yeah, that's a great way to put that.
And your deck should be as themed and linear as most constructed decks at the end. Like, if your deck is a pile of good cards, most of the time that's not going to cut it in cube. There's some exceptions to that, but most of the time, if you're just like, I'm going to draft black-green and take good black and green cards, this is what everyone does their first cube.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to get murdered because you're going to play against a 16-land mono-red deck or mono-white deck that kills you pretty quickly and disrupts you while doing so. Or you're going to play against a deck that just sits there and casts Remands and and Preordains and Ponders, then goes Kiki Jiki Splinter Twin.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're going to play against a deck that plays a Sneak Attack, or so on and so forth. So keep in mind what decks you're trying to draft, and the way to do that is kind of know what decks are available in the cube, because most cubes have a list. And of course, once you've cubed enough, you don't actually need to look at the list. Like, I don't look at the list for the Vintage Cube when it goes on to Magic Online. I just have drafted, those cubes enough that if they've changed 20 cards, it doesn't really matter that much.
Right.
So know what each color pair or color is doing, like what are the themes available. And there are generally three monocolor decks. Mono red, which is purely aggressive, trying to play a bunch of 1-drops, play a bunch of burn spells, finish you off with Sulfuric Vortex or Koth or Fire Blast or what have you.
Yeah.
Mono white, which is a white weenie deck which again cares about 1-drops, tries to disrupt you with Thalia or Armageddon, like destroy all your lands or make all your spells cost more. And mono green, which is, as you might imagine, just a bunch of elves and expensive green cards, which is a surprisingly good strategy.
It really is. Yeah. Your consistency level is very, very high, and the power level is absurd with the green cards up top. When you go through back in time and really just select only the best top tier green, call them the 6, 7, and 8 mana cards, they're dumb. Oh, yeah. Like, they are really crazy good.
In basically every cube, you're going to find an Avenger of Zendikar, a Woodfall Primus, a Craterhoof Behemoth. If you're a Legacy or older cube on Natural Order.
Yeah, exactly. So, Primeval Titan's always in there. There's always a bunch that can finish the game for you. Hornet Queen's one of my favorites too. Yeah,
that one's good too. And one of the strengths of these three decks in particular is it doesn't care about taking lands because they're monocolor for a reason. Like, mono red is a very good deck. Red white aggro, generally not a good deck. Or red black aggro. Like, if once you have a second color in there, it gets a lot worse. We're going to talk about lands later, but one of the reasons these three strategies are tier 1 is that they don't have to use picks on lands very highly. Another deck that's always great is blue red. Depending on which cube you're in, you're going to find different combos to finish the game, whether it's Kiki Jiki, Splinter Twin, Deceiver Exarch, Pestermite, Zealous Conscript, something like that, or Sneak Attack, or something, a spell-based deck like with Young Pyromancer, Thing in the Ice. And the reason blue and red is such a good combo is blue is the best color in cube. You're going to find often like 3 to 4 people drafting blue in cube and it's still going to be fine.
Yep.
It combines good card draw, good counterspells, and good card selection. So Preordain, Ponder, Brainstorm, Remand, Mana Leak, Miscalculation into card draw like Compulsive Research, Thirst for Knowledge, Careful Consideration, whatever. And then red gets to play cheap burn spells, which actually are really good because against creature decks like White Weenie or Mono Red, you can burn their creatures. But against other decks, you can just burn them. They're actually pretty flexible, as opposed to black having a bunch of Doom Blades is not quite as flexible. And the burn spells can often go after Planeswalkers, which is really important.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you mentioned, by the way, are the combo aspects of it, the Kiki Jiki Twin and the Sneak Attack and stuff like that. One thing that I think people sometimes get stuck on the first few times that they draft these is they'll actually look at a card like Splinter Twin and go, well, are the other pieces here? And the answer is yeah. Like, you have to remember that somebody put this cube together with some amount of thought. And if they're going to put a card like Splinter Twin in their high-powered cube, they're not doing it just so you can put it on like a Snapcaster Mage and get some value, right? They're doing it because there's a combo there. So your default stance should be, if I see half of a known combo piece, the other pieces are available in the cube. Now, the interesting thing comes in on how many cards are in the cube that you're drafting. Because typically a cube will have more cards in it than are required for an 8-person draft.
The most common is 540 cards, 360 of which will be seen in the draft, so 2/3 of which.
Right. And so that doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to open that the pool is going to guaranteed to open the other side of the combo. So keep it in mind that you might not actually get it. Somebody may take it or it might not get open. So it's not a guarantee. Although some cubes are 360 where you are actually going to see all the cards open and then you just have to worry about somebody taking it from you. But in most cubes, like Luis said, that isn't the case. But again, I think people get a little hung up on, well, is the other part of my combo here? And the answer should be yes. If it's not, then you should have a sit down with the person who made the cube and go, why is Splinter Twin in here? You didn't put anything else that combos with it.
Right. And you're not really going to play very many cubes where that's the case, where where you've got hanging threads that don't make sense, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, I've never run into a cube where if you see something like, unburial rights, there's no gifts ungiven.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also look at the lists beforehand, but for the most part, these combos will have will sometimes end up missing the other pair because, like as you said, they're not actually open.
Right.
Though something
what
like
are the other
Twin
archetypes?
has a bunch of different combo pieces, so it's got some replaceable ones, which is one of the reasons it's such a good combo.
Right, and that is that is something you should consider just in a more general sense with any type of combo card. Is that sure when you take a reanimate, you're thinking Grizzlebrand or whatever, but there's a lot of things in between. And I use the example of putting Splinter Twin on Snapcaster Mage is not the thing you were necessarily trying to do. Turns out when you need to do that, it's actually really powerful. So, I'm not saying you shouldn't keep these things in mind. But of course, when you pick a Splinter Twin, you're thinking, okay, I can resolve this on one of these creatures and just win the game outright.
So some of the other combos in the cube are a Reanimator, which is usually blue-black, when you're talking about ways to get creatures in the graveyard and ways to reanimate them with cards like Reanimate, Animate Dead, or Necromancy.
Mm-hmm.
Blue-green is kind of like an offshoot of the mono-green deck where you're basically are splashing blue for cards like Factor Fiction or Mold Drifter or or counters that cost only 1 blue mana. This deck usually is like base green plus a blue for like Mana Leak or Remand. Though sometimes if there's an opposition, that card is by itself an archetype. It lets you tap one of your creatures to tap one of their permanents. So you just play a bunch of green dorks, play opposition, tap all their lands.
Yeah, Llanowar Elves plus opposition is dumb. It is extremely powerful, and it works super well together because one powers the other one out earlier than it would normally show up and then enables it after. It is fantastic combo.
Blue-white is traditionally a control deck in Cube, though it can sometimes be a tempo deck if you get cards like Geist of Saint Draft or Vendilion Click. It's usually just like a Wrath, Planeswalker, counter card draw, Sphinx's Revelation type deck.
And even moving further in that direction thanks to Teferi and Teferi.
Yeah. Red-black and green-red and red-white are all largely unplayable in Cube. Like, it's not – it doesn't – I'm not trying to say, like, if you're playing these two colors, you're wrong. But there's not very many reasons to combine these two colors because they're not good control colors. If you want to be aggressive, you're better picking red or white and just sticking to that. Yep. And red-green is basically a worse mono-green ramp deck, though sometimes you can splash red in your green deck.
Right. It's just usually you'd rather have the stuff from blue like we mentioned.
As we've gone through these archetypes, basically it's better to know what the archetypes are than the color combinations because it's not usually like a normal set where each color combination is doing a thing. It's, do I want to go towards a sneak attack deck, a reanimator deck, a splinter twin deck, a white lady deck, whatever.
Yeah. And by the way, it should be noted here that, the metric that we're measuring all of these things up against is just raw power, right? I mean, the stuff that you just named are like, some of the more powerful cards ever printed or some of the more powerful combos ever printed. Splinter Twin combo wins the game on the spot. Sneak attack lets you play, 15 mana creatures for 1, right? We're talking about not about, going back to Louise said before, like a pile of good cards that sort of add up to something good. They don't. You either need to have a cohesive unit that is all pointed in one direction, or you need to have these 1-2 punches, these ways to just snap off huge amounts of advantage throughout the course of the game. And that's kind of where you want to focus, especially on the older cubes.
Yeah. And you need to be doing something good, right? You need to be doing something worthwhile. So moving away from these like specific combo decks, let's take a look at some lessons that will help you basically any cube you'll draft, barring something like a mono green cube or something really, really far out there. Mm-hmm. One is value lands higher than you think. So let's say I'm blue-red. Let's say I have a deck where I first picked Splinter Twin and second picked Deceiver Exarch. Mm-hmm. When I see a card like Steam Vent or Scalding Tarn or Volcanic Island, one of these like blue-red duels, I value it higher than almost any card I could put in my deck, besides like a combo piece. Because being able to cast your spells is really important. And a lot of cube decks, if you end up drafting, let's say, blue-white, and your mana base is 9 islands, 8 planes, you're just going to lose. Because what's going to happen?
That is woefully deficient, yes.
Is you're going to have like maybe 1 or 2 games that you're just going to give away by not having mana problems that your opponents aren't. You're going to be pretty far behind. A good rule of thumb is if you're a 2-color deck without like really hard mana requirements, we're not talking playing Kiki Jiki and Cryptic Command in the same deck,
Mm-hmm.
Like you're just talking a deck that has single blue, double blue, single white, double white, right? Blue white control. You ideally have like 4 lands that tap for blue or white mana, or can fetch lands
too. Yep.
And
you can get them, by the way, and we should say this too, is that the reason why Luis is willing to do this and take that Scalding Tarn over even a good card in his blue-red deck or whatever, is because if you fast forward to the end of a cube draft and all you do is take the best, non-land card for your deck at every juncture, you will end up with way too many playables in cube, and so many cards are roughly interchangeable for each other. When you think about a single mana red burn spell, right? Go through the list that you'll see in a cube with bolts and chain lightnings and stuff like that. While there is a hierarchy and you would prefer the more efficient, better ones, they are roughly replaceable with each other. And so what that means is, let's say you ended up with 4 1-mana burn spells, but your deck only wants 1 or 2. Well, 2 of them end up in your sideboard, and they're not coming in out of the sideboard very often because they're not really different than what you already have. If you could turn those 2 burn spells that you didn't end up playing into 2 dual lands, your mana base would be much, much better. Now do that across the board with a couple of threats, maybe an expensive thing, maybe a card you don't really need. And all of a sudden you have 3 to 6 duels or, utility lands that you're playing without really giving anything up, because you're still above the mark on playables, assuming that you weren't fighting like your direct neighbor, for your exact deck or whatever. And that isn't normally the case, right? That's in fact almost in all other formats. That's very, very rare where lands play such an important role and where you can actually afford to spend real picks. I mean, you were talking about pick 4. There's some very good card for your deck and you're like Scalding Tarn. And the reason for that is because there's 7 lightning bolts in the cube and there's 3, blue-red duels.
Right.
So you need to pick them up while you can.
You're always, if you didn't take any lands and just took spells, you just end up with 31 playables and have to cut 7 of them anyway. So
exactly.
8 of them.
Yeah.
How do you want to construct your mana base? The reason I mentioned specifically Steam Vent, Scalding Tarn, Volcanic Islander, because those are dual lands or shock lands plus fetch lands. So in a Legacy Cube, you're going to have access to Volcanic Island plus Steam Vents as duals. In a Modern Cube, it'll just be Steam Vents. And then once you have one of these blue-red lands in your blue-red deck, any fetch land that can get blue or red becomes mega valuable. So we're talking Arid Mesa, Misty Rainforest, Flooded Strand, whatever. Once you don't have that, if you don't have them, Scalding Tarn is the one you want the most. Mm-hmm. And then you also have the blue-red lands that aren't part of this cycle, which are just like Spire Bluff Canal or Wandering Fumarole or any, Sulphur Falls, like basically any of the lands that tap for blue-red but aren't a fetch land or fetchable. So your priority order should definitely be fetch lands, then dual lands, then the lands that just tap for your 2 colors. Though you need to kind of balance them. Once you already have a volcanic, Steam Vents becomes a lot less of a priority because you can just get other fetch lands. Mm-hmm. And you're really looking for some combination of these where you, again, have 4 or more lands. So if you want to go back to this blue-white deck we talked about, if you have 1 Hallowed Fountain, so it's a blue-white land that counts as both plains and island, and you have 2 white or blue fetches, so let's say 1 Windswept Heath and 1 Misty Rainforest, and then you have a Celestial Colonnade, I would say your mana is pretty good. You effectively have 4 lands that tap for blue or white.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously more is still better. If you end up like 6, then your mana is like on near perfect. Because then if you end up with 6, you're talking about having something like 12 of one source and 11 of the other. And that's great. Basically what you don't want to end up is your 9-8 is not going to cut it. You want something like 11 plus of both sources if you can get there.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, it makes it so much easier to cast your stuff. You just don't run into those games where colors become a problem. One deck, by the way, we should mention, or one strategy we should mention while we're talking about valuing lands higher than you think, it kind of goes back into the archetypes, is there usually is a 5-color deck available, or call it 4-color, 5-color, whatever.
I'm not really a believer myself, but these decks do exist.
Dude, these Planeswalker decks are dumb. Like, you just cast a Planeswalker every turn, your opponent can't keep up with all of them, and half of them are more than half of them are 2-for-1s or get a creature out of the way. And once you get 2 Planeswalkers rolling, it becomes very difficult, to combat it. The basic strategy, by the way, of what we're talking about here is look for irreplaceable, super powerful cards. And I don't mean expensive. I just mean like, like opposition, like these cards that we've mentioned, the combo pieces or things like that, or planeswalkers that are individually powerful. And if you don't see those, take a land. And people, you can end up, I remember way back in the day when John Laux was the co-host on the show, he said something. He said his ideal mana base when he's drafting that deck is to have one of each basic land.
Yep. Just
and then everything else are duels. Yeah, exactly. And then everything else are duels or tri-lands or fetches or whatever of some sort.
I'm going to go on record and say I don't tend to draft this deck. I think it's less good.
Well, I don't understand. Why not? I've drafted it a ton of times. It's great.
I think it's less good than just finding two good colors to be in, one of which is blue, one of which is another color. You just don't lack for power and your mana base is better.
I guess, but I'm like, I don't know. I don't put it on the same scale that we normally do. Like if I just want a good deck, I can draft mono red. Nobody ever drafts it because, there's one person or zero per thing, and because it's not fun to play. But I don't do it ever.
Well, in any case, when this deck definitely wants its lands over almost everything.
Yeah. It frees you up, of course, to kind of figure out what you want to do in the third pack or whatever. So, that's a big advantage.
Okay, now that you've kind of gotten into the mindset of taking lands pretty high, there's another category of cards that you need to take higher.
Yes, very much so.
And I came up with a tagline for this.
This is pretty great, I have to say.
Not having cheap cards is expensive. And basically, what I'm trying to say here is that you need to have a lot of cheap, effective cards in Cube, because if you just have too many expensive cards, you're going to get run over, and you're going to have a less efficient deck, and you're going to curve out less well. Oh yeah. So what I'm talking about here is I'm just on the train of taking, Preordain over Frost Titan every single time. I'm taking Remand over random like 4 to 5 mana Planeswalker. Like I want my cards to not cost very much because there's tons of expensive good win conditions. Like sure, Consecrated Sphinx is better than Frost Titan, but I would rather have a Frost Titan plus a Mana Leak, a Remand, and Preordain than Consecrated Sphinx, Frost Titan, and 2 other random cards. Like I would rather have cheap cards plus, even if it's like tier 2 expensive cards compared to like tier 1 expensive cards. And
no, that's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
If you don't have this, you're just going to end up with these hands of like too many expensive cards, or you're just too slow out the gates, or your opponent has the cheap cards and they do something like, Mana Leak your 4 mana play, then next turn play their card, and then you play something else and they're like, okay, so pierce it. And you're just so far behind.
Yes.
So
yeah, it's interesting because that's like next level cubing, right? Is when you get to the point that you understand which of the expensive cards are actually important, right, for your strategy, and which ones are. They go in the same bucket that I was talking about with the lightning bolts. There's 6 lightning bolt variants in the cube. Well, you know what? Yeah. There's 6 drops as well in your color, 6 or 7 drops or whatever. And even though you look at them and you go, oh my God, right? It's Frost Titan. Holy crap. That's like, I remember how good that card is. And you're right. It is really good. It's also replaceable. And that's the hard part to see when you're used to drafting normally because, you just don't see bombs like that often. But, you're like, you know what? I'll take the Preordain. I'll pass the Frost Titan. It's fine. We'll figure it out. And then, hey, look, there it is. The Consecrated Sphinx. I'll take it now. Right. And this happens all the time. And when you get really good at cubing, when you've done it a lot, is when you can differentiate between, look, this Craterhoof Behemoth is the payoff for my mono green deck. I must take it here, even over another elf or whatever. But when you come across a less potent finisher for your deck in green, and you can say, well, I don't really need it.
When you take Noble Hierarch over Avenger of Zendikar, right?
Perfect example.
Yeah, when you take something like when you take Mana Leak over Wormcoil Engine, which you should do every single time, by the way, because one of the things I see people do frequently is, especially if you're not super experienced in Cube, you go and you're like, wow, Inferno Titan, wow, Wormcoil Engine, like these are bombs. These are the cards you draft for. Glorybringer, wow. And it's like, these are good cards, but you know what's better is taking a Remand or a Miscalculation or a Thoughtseize and having effective early plays, and then having good late plays too, because at some point the people who are taking these cards early realize they can't take more of them, and you still get them. right? You'll still get past some of these cards. There are some exceptions. Jace the Mind Sculptor in every cube he's in is still better than all these cards we're talking about, right? Like,
right. But that's the key. Like, that's what I'm saying. If you've really spent the time to learn cube, then you already know that this, you mentioned, opposition, right? That's an irreplaceable card. That is not a card that you go, I can pass opposition. I'll pick up something similar later. You won't. There's only one opposition in the cube, and there's only one card that does something that powerful. You need to take it. Right. Where if you see Jace the Mind Sculptor, great, same thing. Like, that card's so powerful on its own, but you dip down a little bit. Maybe it's a 4-mana Ral, right? Ral, whatever it's called, right? You know what? That's a pretty replaceable Planeswalker. That does not have the same pull that opposition or Jace has. And you will learn that the more you cube. But those are the key things, is that you need to know which one of these are liquid, right? Which one of these are they're fungible, right? I can replace them sort of at will, and which ones are not replaceable.
I mean, I had a chance to observe people cubing in the wild, as it were. At Vegas, we were running the live cube draft.
Oh, yeah.
And the ones that I wasn't in, I was watching people draft, and it's just, there are a lot of people who could stand to look for a lot more cheap cards over the expensive ones, as tempting as the expensive ones are.
How many of your, friends and local people in Vegas did you con into buying into the cubes? Was it like a Scott-Vargas family reunion up in there, or did it actually?
No, it was a lot of people I had never met before.
You actually sold some tickets. Good for you.
No, those things were fun.
No, I was there. I saw it. It looked really cool, actually. I was actually a little bit jealous. I had to get ready to do coverage stuff, I think I was just in the booth already, but you were cubing away. Mm-hmm.
And then I did a bunch of cubes last weekend, just with the local people here. And here, these people have cubed, these are all like our friends who live here who have cubed enough with our cube and cubed enough in general that I'm not getting 7th pick preordains anymore. But it's a pretty dramatic difference, right? Once people start taking the cheap cards. And if you just take lands higher and take cheap cards higher, you're going to do better in cube than you used to. It's just full stop.
Very much.
So speaking, that kind of dovetails into our next topic, which is your cube deck either needs to be fast or interactive. And it doesn't need to be both, but it needs to choose one of these. You need to kill them fairly quickly. So we're talking, we're not talking constructed. We're not talking turn 3 kills, but you need to kill them by, around turn 5 or so. Mm-hmm. Or you need to have good interaction, because otherwise your opponent's going to go over the top of you. And when I talk about interaction, I mean counter spells, cards like Thalia, discard like Thoughtseize, land destruction. I don't mean just creature removal. If you have a bunch of Doomblades in your deck, that's not going to be enough, because you're going to usually run into someone who doesn't care about that. Even in
as a Planeswalker.
Right. Planeswalkers are endemic in the modern and legacy cubes, and then in the legacy and vintage cubes, you also have a lot of really powerful win conditions, because there's cards like Sneak Attack and Channel that just don't exist in other cubes, and Tinker, that sort of stuff. So basically, you want to either be on the mono red or mono white plan, which is killing pretty quickly, though both those decks also have small land destruction components, other disruption, or a blue deck that has enough counters, or a black deck with enough discard. You don't want to just end up in I'm a mid-range deck, I don't kill really quickly, and I don't disrupt, because then you will lose. Mm-hmm. And then we also have sideboard cards. Sideboard cards are a little different in cube than they are, because you're not going to see very many Pyroblasts or cranial extractions or unmoored egos or noxious grasps in cubes, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because people, when they choose the cards to go into their cube, are looking at it on like a card by card basis, right? Yeah. They're like, what are the exciting, cool cards that I want to put in my favorite cards from back in the day, the most powerful stuff from the new set, that type of thing. And it's very rare that you'll come up and be like, what we need? Noxious Grasp. That's the one, a Celestial Purge in my cube. Because the truth is that those aren't even fun to draft, right? When you pick them, you're like, I guess I'll take this and whatever. And then maybe it ends up being okay. So most people kind of ignore them. So what you need to do is shift your mind state a little bit, because there are still cards that are good out of the sideboard, or particularly wouldn't be main deckable as often. A good example would be like Wrath effects, like Sweepers. You often don't want to main deck a bunch of them. I know you think, it's limited. I could play 3 Wrath of Gods in my deck and I'm a control deck. Like, this is going to be amazing. It might be, but there's plenty of decks, again, to go back to planeswalkers or, kind of artifact-based strategies or combo decks, and which, by the way, do very much exist in the cube, that your sweeper doesn't look very good at all. It's either too slow against mono red or something like that, where it's not really going to be effective, or your opponent's going to combo you off or play a couple of planeswalkers and you're going to be hurting. But you want to keep cards like that in mind as sideboard options, because if you play the mono green deck, yes, you do want that thing. You want to put the wrath effects into your deck. And there's a lot of things like that that'll pop up from time to time. So you have to kind of shift your focus from the more super streamlined individual sideboard silver bullet type cards and move them over to things that you may not really consider to be a sideboard option in normal drafting, but actually ends up being that way here. A lot of the cards that do this too are 2-for-1 based cards, like cards that say when this enters the battlefield, destroy an artifact.
Yeah.
That a lot of times is how you can kind of get like a built-in hedge. And even then, you sometimes don't play those cards in the main. I mean, it depends what kind of cube you have, if there's signets in it or if it's an old one or whatever with all the artifact-based mana ramp. But sometimes you just need to make sure, okay, this is actually my sideboard option against a heavy artifact deck. To bring that in. Same thing with enchantments or any of these sort of 2-for-1 type cards. You want to really pay close attention in game one to what type of strategy you're playing and what type of cards could be good against it. Another example that comes to mind is a card like Murderous Redcap, right? It's 4 mana. When it enters the battlefield, it does 2 to something. Now that's a good card. I mean, that's just a solid, really like kind of all-arounder style good card. But there's a lot of decks, like control decks and stuff, that you may not run it in because you have better options. You're not replacing Jace the Mind Sculptor with a Murderous Redcap. But if your opponent is playing mono white, you're going to want to bring that thing in. You're going to want to pick off one of their creatures and have a blocker, maybe even an Elves deck or something like that. You want to bring that in as well. So keep your mind a little more open, since you're not going to get fed these directly obvious sideboard cards as often as you would in normal.
Yeah, so sweepers, like you mentioned, ways to kill artifacts or enchantments. Another thing is creature removal. Like let's say a blue-black deck, I will normally do something like play a Murderous Cut and a Cast Down, but maybe I won't play the third or fourth. Mm-hmm. Having those on the board is good, because you'll play against a green deck and be like, I want 5 creature.
Yep. And of course you can take those out, in the matchups where they're
also, like having alternate threats can be good. I know that if I'm playing against a deck that has, let's say, a bunch of wraths, right, and I'm playing mono green, I would rather maybe take out some of my high end and put in more planeswalkers. If I have some planeswalkers, like Garruk Primal Hunter is one that I don't always play in mono green, because usually your high end cards have better options. Mm-hmm. But I could definitely see doing something like taking out one of your good big green cards and putting in that Garruk, because you really want to have a versatility of threats against wraths.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, life gain stuff too, right? You might have a Thragtusk that you're like, didn't quite make the cut. But of course, if you're going to be playing against an aggressive deck, it's in.
Cards like Kitchen Finks, Thragtusk.
Yep.
These are cards that, look, this is something that speaks to the power of cubes. Most people listening are like, why would you not main deck Kitchen Finks and Thragtusk?
But you just don't sometimes.
I'm like, generally, 80% of the time I don't main deck Finks, and like probably half the time I don't main deck Thragtusk.
Agreed.
Just because when you play against a blue deck, you don't want either of these cards.
No.
And blue decks are like half the table.
Exactly.
But against a mono red deck or a mono white deck, yeah, these tend to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Another card that I think is overrated in the main deck but good out of the sideboard are swords, like Sword of Feast and Famine, Sword of Fire Ice. Mm-hmm. I tend to not want to play these because I think they just set you up to get, tempoed by creature removal. But out of the board, they can be really effective.
Yeah, when you know that the way is going to be clear. I mean, if the swords are always this really high risk proposition, because if you do start connecting with them, they are amazing. Don't get it wrong. Like you will win that game most of the time. But the times when you don't connect, it wasn't like it didn't cost you anything. It cost you a card and a bunch of mana. And if they blow you out by killing your creature, that could be enough for you to lose the game. Like, Cube can be a ruthless environment. And if you decide, I'm just going to sink all my eggs into this basket of casting, resolving, and equipping and attacking with some creature with a sword on it, and that creature dies, you could just be dead.
Yeah. And I think that swords are one of the cards that suffer the most from the transition from draft to cube, because they're just mega bombs in draft and like marginal playables in cube.
Yeah, they're almost a trap, right? Like to me, they're veering closer to trap than not in cube.
I totally agree.
They're like the best cards in regular draft.
I mean, basically, if we want to sum all this up, it's that you're trying to make your deck consistent and do something early. So that's why we want your lands. So you don't wait. You're not waiting on your red source to play your red cards until turn 4 because you drew all islands, right? You want to have a bunch of dual lands. You want cheap cards so you can start interacting from turn 1 or 2. And then you want a powerful end game, whether that's a combo, whether that's a synergy deck, like, get a bunch of green creatures and a Crater Hoof, whether that's an aggro deck, a land destruction deck with like Armageddon, whatever it is. Or you want a deck that's highly disruptive and has a lot of card draw. So if you can do your thing, have it be powerful, have it, start going quickly and be consistent because of lands, then that's basically what you need to do. All these decks have those characteristics. I do want to also say that Cube is just fun. Like, one of my favorite decks to draft in Cube is Birthing Pod. I will not claim it's a very effective strategy, but I like doing it.
You like figuring it out?
Yeah, it's just a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So, don't misunderstand us and think that we don't have fun playing Cube. Both of us have made plenty of picks which we know are not going to lead to the highest win percentage, but we do want to give you some handholds as to how you can be a more effective cuber, because that's fun too. I know I've definitely talked to people who get frustrated of like, all I ever do is lose in cube. How can I get a little better? And I think these are easy ways to put you on your path. And then you don't have to follow all of them. As long as you know them, it's good, right?
Yep.
I'm sure folks have watched both of us draft plenty of times, whether it's on video or whatever. And, they see us make a not optimal pick because I want to have fun because you don't know what the right pick is. Like, so, we both have our reasons for making these picks.
Yeah. Not having cheap cards that's expensive is great, by the way. It's really kind of grown on me. I think it's good. It's also a good way to flex kind of a shortcut that you'll hear sometimes as well, where if you find 2 cards that are close, you're not really sure which one to pick. They're kind of a tie in your mind. Yeah. Take the cheap one. Yeah. So that lives out very much so in Cube, where it's very clear that it's happening. Also, I did want to reach back a little bit to the beginning about building your own cube. I love the idea of building a cube that isn't perfectly exactly how you would have drawn it up and then working your way up towards it, right? You can totally have a playable cube. Yeah, you can have one that is just the cards that you own. And then as you go along, shift out the stuff that isn't working or that you don't like for either new cards that you obtain either by drafting or whatever, or, you put an order at Channel Fireball or wherever to fill out a bunch of the slots, and you sort of start growing it from there. Because the thing that people tend to forget, right, oftentimes about limited is that it's relative, right? We had a situation at the Grand Prix in Vegas where in the final draft pod, the winner's deck, Alan, his deck wasn't even that good. It was fine, right? He was like okay with it, but it was a little better than most of the decks in the pod because it's relative. And if you're going to throw a cube, at your friends or your play group or whatever, well, yeah, you might not have Power 9 or even, a bunch of the old duels and all that stuff because they're too expensive for you right now. That's fine. Nobody else gets them in the cube either, right? It's okay. It works out so that if everybody's on the same playing field, then you're good to go. And then you can sort of level up your cube as you go and as you see fit. And I think that's just a great way to get a lot of extra value out of the cards that you have anyway, especially when you consider that a lot of the cube cards aren't even the particularly valuable ones. They're just good limited cards. And there's always a good home for those as well in a like a modern cube or a commons and uncommons cube as well. There's so many sweet cards, over the years that sort of lose their way because they're not good enough for Commander or Modern, and so they just kind of go away, and this is a place where you can fit those in and still have some fun.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend trying it out, whether it's on Magic Online, whether it's building your own cube, like Marshall just suggested. Whatever it is, cubing is, like, we're not exaggerating. It is literally the most fun way we have of playing Magic.
Yes.
Like, yes. The first 5 drafts of a new set are competitive, but overall, cube is just the highest baseline.
Yeah.
So.
It is. It's what you want to do. I was going to say this before, but I remember when I was teaching Adam, my buddy Adam how to play a few years back. And, I told him, he's like, well, what's the deal with Cube? Because it had come out on Magic Online and I was playing it. And I told him, like, this is the goal. Like, right now, you're still at the beginning stages of learning, back then. And I said, this is where you want to get to. And, to his credit, it wasn't that long, maybe only 6 months or a year later, he did try his first cube. Now, admittedly he was overwhelmed. He was like, I don't get this. Like, I have to read every card. This is just way over my head. And he was actually a little bit discouraged, thinking that, maybe this wasn't going to be for him. But I encouraged him to stick with it. And he cubes regularly now. He found his niche. That's a big thing that a lot of people do as well. He's the blue-green drafter. He loves that deck. Oh. He sent me a deck a couple days ago when the cube was up, and it was some other color pair. And he's like, oh, I'm a little nervous about this. And it didn't go well. And then he sent me pack one, pick one. It was like tooth and nail. And he's like, I'm going back home. And it's like, all right, well, I guess, everybody has their lane. And I mean, I happen to have 3 or 4 lanes in a cube, but I think that's kind of where you want to be. Pick 2 or 3 archetypes that you really like, and you can usually get one of them.
I mean, that's part of the reason I want to do an episode about cube every now and then is I want to give people the encouragement who have not cubed to cube, because it is intimidating to get into, and it is complicated. Yeah. And this is useful even for people who have cubed for years. But if you haven't cubed, it's also very useful. And I want you to experience that. That's
right. So try it out. Do it yourself. And we're going to call it a show here. Luis got a meeting to go to, and I want to get this thing edited up. Try a cube. Trust us. Stick with it. It does get better. I also was overwhelmed the first time I did it and drafted the green-white creatures deck with swords against the ringers of the Seattle Magic scene, and they annihilated me. But I got it. I started to figure it out, and I haven't looked back since. This show is brought to you by channelfireball.com, and I want to mention their buy list again, because this is actually particularly relevant to what we were just talking about. You got a pile of random rares that you're not going to use anyway. You can trade them in for store credit on CFB. They'll give you plus 30% on that trade in, like I mentioned before. And you can get a nice little cube rolling, right? You can pick out a bunch of, say, make it to start things off, make it a commons and uncommons cube so that you can keep the price down a little bit lower while you build up some inventory to try to get up into the legacy and vintage side of cubing. And, you can make a spreadsheet or a list on a paper or whatever of the stuff that you want. And you can go through the last sets, just go through and find the cards that you loved, that you drafted, the sweet uncommons that have kind of disappeared from your life. Where's River Hoopu? Right? Like, where did that bird fly off?
That's a good one.
I miss it.
Good callback.
Right? Like, I would like to have that card in my hands, drawing me cards, on the battlefield, but it's just gone because it's not good enough for the older formats. And, I would like to cube with that. And, you can pick up cards like that and build out your cube and then work your way forward. And again, you can use the buy list on CFB as a way to kind of kickstart that with that plus 30% if you're going to trade in for your other stuff. You can find me on social media, Marshall_LR. Luis is LSV. Everything related to the podcast is over at lrcast.com. That's the place to go for everything. All the links and stuff on the front page. Plus, you can listen to any episode of LR ever. I have all of them uploaded there. When I moved over to the different website, I had to do them all manually, but now they're all there. I'm very happy. This was a few years ago now, but you can listen to all of the archives there. You can download the show, and you can find the show. We try to get it basically everywhere. We have it on Pandora, on Spotify, on YouTube. You can do it on RSS feed here. You can find it on CFB. You can find it on lrcast.com directly. We have a direct download link on LRcast if you just want to get the file itself, and you can put it, however you want to, put it on your media player or whatever it is that you want to do. You're going to find it. Our goal is to make the show accessible to you anywhere that you want to find it. And that's about that. All right, we're going to call it a show here. Thanks so much. And next week, we'll be doing some sunset action for M20 and or MH1. We'll figure out how to do it. We'll see you then.
So, not quite cube, but played a pretty interesting game last weekend. We had rented, me and the folks here in Denver I rented because I'm the one who does all that, a cabin in Breckenridge, which is like a ski town, even though it's in the middle of summer now, obviously. But 2 hours
sounds cool.
Out of Denver. And when we're there, there's 9 of us. Raptor, Josh Utter-Layton, calls us all down, and he had designed a game. He's like, you come down, and you find me that I've been murdered. And he's lying there, and he says, each one of you has a role, and you have until Monday, because this was on Friday, to figure out to achieve your objectives and figure out who the killer is. So it was kind of like Werewolf. We each got a role. And funnily enough, I was the murderer, as these things go. It was random.
Jeez, Josh has been so good to you all these years, and this is how you repay him.
And it was so cool because everyone had special abilities. Josh was like, he was running the game because he was dead. He wasn't in the game, but he was running it. He would adjudicate things that happened. He had hidden items all around the house. And when you found different items, like you could combine them. So for example, you could find, like I found gunpowder, and had I found a gun, I could combine gunpowder and metal to make bullets, and then I'd have a weapon.
So we need to have the murderer have more bullets. Okay.
Yeah. And different characters had different players had different powers. Like some of them got extra information. Some of them were able to build things. Yeah. Some of them, I started with a weapon because I was the murderer. And the whole weekend it was like people plotting, trying to figure out, because like everyone had different goals too. Like some people's goals were to, like mine was just to survive because I had already killed someone. All I wanted to do was survive until Monday.
You're trying to get away with it, right?
Some people's goals was to make sure a different person survived, or if that person didn't survive, kill the person who killed them, right?
Oh man!
Some people's goals was to kill someone. Some people's goals, it was all just different, right? And it was so cool because people were like I didn't know what the rules were because none of us knew the rules of the game, which is awesome. It was because Josh just made it up, so. None of us, it wasn't like a game where you know what all the different ranges of things that people could have or could do are. We didn't know anything. We just had to kind of figure it out. And
so each person knew about themselves,
yes,
but then you didn't get to know about that's really interesting.
So I knew that I had extra information about where some of the items were, and I knew that I was the killer, but I didn't know what anyone else's goals or objectives or anything were. So I had to just lie through my teeth the whole weekend about this kind of stuff. And,
oh my God. That's insane.
And as other people were sharing information, and as I was plotting with them, I figured out more stuff and it helped me figure out what I could lie about and what I couldn't lie about. But it was really hard because initially I didn't know anything.
Wow.
And I just had to
and
say
they
something.
could have been lying too, right?
Yeah, that And at one point, one of the things that he had a backpack there, and that was the safe, and you had to have the combination, it had a combination lock on it. But at one point, someone who had turned out to be Justin Cohen figured out you could steal the safe. So he stole the backpack. He didn't know how to open it. But we come back from a lunch, and some people are like, wait, the safe is gone. And it turned out he stole it and hid it outside, and then was going to try to figure out how to open it later. But this was so no one else could open it.
Oh my God, that is cool.
Yeah. So the way it ended up resolving is I got confronted. Gabby figured out I was the killer, so I killed her because she didn't confront me where other people were around. And then the house was
that's so brutal.
The house was pretty spread out, and someone came down to look for her, and I was hiding. And when they came to look for her, I killed them because they went by themselves. And then I went around the house just killing people one by one because a bunch of the guys were just downstairs watching a movie and they weren't listening because every time I killed someone, they got to scream. That was part of the game rules is you got to scream. But they were it was like out of a horror movie. I remember walking down there and listening, and someone had screamed, and Matt Nass was like, guys, did you hear something? And they're all like, I don't know. He's like, I'm going to go check it out.
And then you killed him?
I killed him.
Oh my God. This is where you're screaming at the horror movie like, no, don't go down that hallway.
Yeah. So it wasn't actually Matt Nass who I killed. I killed everyone else. It turned out Matt Nass's character was immune to hand-to-hand weapons. That was his ability. So when I tried to sneak down and kill him, he killed me instead. So technically he won, but I feel like I did pretty well killing 7 of the 9 people there. So
yeah, I feel like you kind of did it and somehow getting away with the first 7 kills. Nice job.
So it was really fun. It was a cool thing. If you're ever gonna it's the sort of thing you could build and you don't need to be going to a cabin to do it. Anytime over a weekend, you could play it in just one day. It's a kind of social deduction kind of game. And mostly I just wanted to point out how smart Josh is and how creative he is because it was a really cool experience.
Yeah. Incredible.